Welcome to Cultivating Victory Live. Today is January the 30th, and I'm here with Glenn Schultz and Darrol Shillingburg. Darrol is a master gardener and lifelong gardener, and he has a phenomenal website that I'll put up here when we're done that shares volumes of information about local food production in the Las Cruces, New Mexico area. Darrol is going to share with us some of the reasons why he thinks home food production is important. So, Darrol?
Take it away, huh?
Take it away. All yours. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks first, Mary, for setting this up and for inviting me so we can proselytize for growing your own food. I have been a little bit of my own story. I started growing food when I was about 11, and that's obviously a long time ago. So I've been at it for quite a while. My work with the master gardeners in Dona County Extension has been largely with organizations, with school gardens, with the school gardening programs, and with community gardens in setting up the community garden programs, and initially in setting up the school gardening programs. I do twice a year workshops here that's sponsored at the Munson Center and the Munson Community Garden. And those are 2 days, they're an hour and a half, 2 different days. One day is a lecture and the next day is a workshop in the garden. So we actually plant a garden bed. And that's an experience that a lot of people don't get anymore because they don't learn how to garden from people who've done gardening. So I'm also working with, of course, my own garden and my own website. And I've been documenting the produce from the garden. I'm working on actually getting data on what you can produce from a local garden, from your own yard, and working on what the cost of that is and what the return is. And so I did that because I heard a lot of people say, well, I'm growing $50 tomatoes. And if you're growing $50 tomatoes, you're doing something not right. And I don't grow $50 tomatoes. I grow about 150 pounds of tomatoes a year because that's what we need in our family in order to provide the tomatoes for the year. This is just one example of the difference. And we wouldn't buy those because I wouldn't go out and buy 150 pounds of tomatoes in a year. If I've got them growing in the garden, I'll harvest them. I make our own tomato sauce. We freeze the tomato sauce. We've got a high quality food that you cannot buy and at a price that is much lower than what you could actually buy it for. So this is really the core of the message, is that you can get the nutrition that you really need in your body to keep you healthy. And you can get that nutrition at a much lower price.
Now, what 150 pounds of tomatoes, does that equate, if you were to jar all those, that'd be 150-pound quarts, or pints rather? Just about
well, some of them, Glenn, we eat fresh. I don't make tomato sauce out of all of them. Some of them I just freeze as whole tomatoes. Just put them in a bag and toss them in the freezer. When you want whole fresh tomatoes, you take them out. It's really not that.
So you don't blanch them or anything. You just freeze fresh tomatoes, is what you're saying.
You can do both. I blanch them and skin them, or I just freeze them whole with skin on. So what I'm working with here is a what I call it a heritage lifestyle. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid in the late 40s, my parents did those kind of things. You know, we grew and we preserved and then we ate through the winter. That just doesn't seem to happen anymore. And I don't really understand why that doesn't happen anymore, because it's a much healthier and more economical and frankly more interesting way to live.
I'm curious, here in southern New Mexico, I talk to a lot of people who have trouble growing tomatoes. They'll get big plants in the summer. They don't get a lot of fruit setting when the heat sets in. What tricks do you have to get your 150 pounds of tomatoes?
Timing and variety. Timing is really critical here in New Mexico because of the biology of tomato plants, and it's the biology of pollination, actually. They will not pollinate at temperatures over about 75 degrees. So you lose about 6 weeks of production time here if you don't start timing correctly.
So when do you plant your tomatoes?
Well, I start tomato plants from seed, and I start in the first half of February.
Okay.
And then I set them out into the garden at usually around April 1st.
Okay.
And that will get you production. The best part of your production will come in July and the first part of August.
And so your magic varieties, what works well?
Big beef works really well here. Heatmaster works well here. And Heatmaster is a pretty new hybrid variety, and it actually does not do blossom drop.
Okay.
A hybrid variety that keeps the blossoms on through the heat. So it keeps producing tomatoes all year round. We grew them last year at the Munson Center. I'm growing them this year for the first time in my garden. So I can't actually tell you how good a tomato sauce that is, but I'll find out. And then you get another tomato, you get tomato growth again here. It starts about the 1st of September, and you start seeing tomatoes set again. And then we get tomatoes production into sometimes into December. The frost here is usually around the end of October, around Halloween time. And so the end of the season is a little unsteady. It varies from year to year, but that's plenty of time to get really good tomato production here. The key is to starting early, putting them out after the first frost, which is usually, well, technically that's April 1 to April 20.
Okay.
Last year it was March 27th. That's why I document stuff, because it actually gives me data that I can work with and that other people can look at and go, well, this is the window of opportunity. And if you don't plant tomatoes until the 1st of May, you're not going to get much.
So when somebody tells you they're growing $50 tomatoes, what do you see people doing in home gardens that is maybe inefficient?
I've got that one down for you. Most people who grow tomatoes here, they go and they buy their tomato plants at the box stores whenever those come in. Now the box stores brings in tomato seedlings at the time when they can sell them, not at the best time to plant them. There's a huge difference. So what you want to do is you want to buy your tomatoes transplants. If you're going to do that, buy them as soon as they come in, and then take them home, pot them up, and then bring them in at night. Tomato plants don't grow well at temperatures below 50 degrees at night. They'll just sit there and be vulnerable. And our spring conditions here are pretty tough. So you want the tomato plants as strong and as viable as possible. If you plant them up and hold them until the 1st of April, first week in April, then you can plant them out, keep them well watered, and they'll produce for you. If you bring them home from the box store, they've been grown under ideal conditions, but you're not going to put them in ideal conditions. You're going to put them out in the real world. A lot of them just die at that point, or they get so stunted that they're just not able to produce the way they should. That's the biggest problem is that they're set out too early, they're set out too tender, they're not adapted to the shock and the actual environment that they're going to take. And then you have to be patient. If they stop producing blossoms and fruit, you just have to wait. And in around the 1st of September, the last half of August, the temperatures here will drop again and they'll start producing fruit. And then you get a second harvest.
What are some of the reasons that you think people, how do you kind of catalyze this desire to grow food at home?
Most people look at the drawbacks.
Uh-huh.
And the drawback I hear most often is I don't have time. So the key is, how do you set up a home food production that fits your time schedule? Even if you have to make some time, I mean, I'll steal time from elsewhere in order to grow my own food, frankly. You know. So, okay, I turn off the TV and I go out in the garden and I work. The other thing that is really limiting is a knowledge base. We have basically lost the general knowledge of how to actually grow your own food. It's been historically transmitted from one generation down to the next, either from parents to children or from grandparents to children. I'm kind of everybody's grandparent when it comes to gardening, because I'm holding that knowledge base and trying to share that in more modern ways, because I can't do it one-on-one with everybody. The reasons for growing your own food, these are eight reasons that I selected just as probably the ones that have the widest interest. And one is that it's hyper local. And if you're interested in food miles, or how far your food travels before you get it, if it's in your garden, you're talking about food feet, and you're not talking about food miles anymore. And I actually keep a record of every harvest from the garden, and those records are run to 500 to 600 times a year, that actually walk out to the garden, harvest something, bring it back in and eat it. And you don't think about that, but I wouldn't go and buy it, or if I did, I'd drive an awful lot of miles just to even buy it at the store. Another reason is the best flavor you can possibly get. When you grow it, you'll like it, and particularly if you have children. How do you introduce children into good quality food? It's by flavor, it's by the taste of it, it's by growing it, it's being active with it. The other is the highest nutrition rate, highest nutritional value that you're going to find. And I'm actually measuring nutritional values between commercial produce, organic produce, and my own homegrown produce. And so far, my own homegrown produce always beats them out in terms of nutritional content. So you have a healthier you, and you have a healthier family. And to me, that's worth some time and learning some things if you need to have new knowledge. And that's partly what I'm about. That's why I'm here. You also have personalized selections, so you can grow what you love to eat, and you don't have to depend on somebody else providing that for you, and you're certainly not limited by what's available in the local grocery store. And I do grow things that I cannot buy. And that's a continuous part of my own personal food system in our family. Are things that just are not available commercially.
So what are some of your favorite foods that you grow that you cannot buy?
Well, the one I eat every day are Itoy onions. And you don't think about eating onions every day, but I think you probably should, because it's really healthy. The Itoy onion is actually a shallot, and it's called an Itoy onion because it was brought in into the North America in probably around 1500, and it's been picked up by the Native Americans in southern Arizona, and they've been growing it ever since. And you can get a start from it from Native Seed Search, probably only in August. It does not bloom, so you can't get seeds. You have to get bulbs to start. And once you get it started, it'll grow year round, and it's got a unique flavor. And it's one of those unique flavors that you just cannot get any other way. And it's virtually labor-free once you get it started. I just water it and harvest it. And then in about late June, you need to harvest all of it and store it for 2 months, and then plant part of it back in the ground. So you literally can eat out of this crop year round with almost no labor once you get started.
Nice.
So, and then tomato sauce, we won't buy tomato sauce anymore. We
Okay.
grow our own tomatoes, so you get the true full flavor of tomatoes. The tomato sauce is made by roasting the tomatoes. So we actually have fire roasted tomatoes that are combined with onions, garlic, and sometimes roasted peppers. So we have this tomato sauce that is absolutely totally unique to our own taste, grown and made to our own taste. And I can tell you, it makes an absolute knock your socks off lasagna. You won't get it any other way.
You know, tomatoes were what sold me on gardening. I took a high school horticulture class when I was a sophomore in high school, and we grew tomatoes out in the greenhouse. And I had never liked tomatoes before that. And once you eat one that's locally grown and ripened on the vine, it's just a whole different ball game. It doesn't taste like a store tomato at all.
Tomato is probably the most extreme example. However, that is true of every other food that you can grow and eat.
Exactly.
Right? So it applies to beets and carrots and spinach and Swiss chard and cucumbers and peppers. Once you acquire taste for that which is homegrown, you just won't buy it. If we run out of homegrown tomato sauce, we're out of tomato sauce until we grow more tomatoes. If we run out of our own home roasted peppers, we just won't buy more until we can grow more and provide and restock our own. So when you develop the taste for that, everything else just doesn't taste right.
How many are eating off your garden? How big is your garden?
I have 1,200 square feet of permanent in-ground garden beds, and I produce 600 to 800 pounds of produce a year out of that, which is about right for two people plus some for the extended family. You don't think you're gonna eat 800 pounds of produce in a year, but if you actually weighed everything you purchased and ate, you'd be illuminated.
But you've been gardening and eating your
Okay.
food since you were 11. Are there any major health issues in your family?
Well, certainly. How do you have a family without major health issues? Oh, there are, but for my wife and I, we eat so much of our produce out of our garden. We are surprisingly healthy, and it really does impact your personal microbiome. There's that relationship between the healthy soil biome and a healthy gut biome is real. When I bring produce in from the garden, it doesn't get shipped anywhere. It doesn't get stored anywhere. It doesn't get surface treated to sanitize it. Any of the epiphytic bacteria or epiphytes that are on that food get eaten. So there is really a healthy relationship between the health of the plants, the health of the soil, and our personal health. And all of this comes at a cost that is less than organic produce. Believe it or not, you can do that. Now, I acknowledge that it takes a knowledge base, and it takes a willingness and a determination to do it at a scale that is economical. So if you're doing 100 square feet, you're not going to see the economy that you get out of 1,000 square feet, right? And if you spend all of your time weeding and watering, you don't get the economy that you get if you set it up all on an automatic drip system, and you set it up so that you have a minimum amount of weeding to do. And then gardening becomes a pleasure. I mean, gardening is not watering and weeding. Gardening is planting and eating.
Sounds good. You know, when I started becoming more concerned about the status of our food system and where we were with our human health and nutrition, something drove me to go back to literature from like the 1800s and really start reading kind of how we got from where we were to where we are today with the food. And one of the things that struck me were repeated articles. I mean, mandatory public education came in 1890, and I took it for granted my whole life. You know, kids go to school. But there was actually a lot of controversy over this. And one of the big arguments against mandatory public education was the fear that kids would not learn how to grow their food. They weren't home learning to farm and helping on the farm. And of course, the compromise of summer vacation was given. But if we look at where we are today, maybe that wasn't enough of a compromise, because very few people grow food today. And when you have somebody sitting in a classroom 180 days a year, that's time that they're not learning anything about how to take care of themselves.
That's true, and there is a change in the trend. The National Gardening Association did a survey, and this data is from 2014, that 1 out of 3 households in the United States is growing something to eat. They didn't say how much, but they are growing something to eat. And there is a growing trend of millennials being interested in growing their own food. They are more interested. So how do we communicate with them? How do we provide the knowledge base for them? And how do we support them? That's really the key question. I got the knowledge base, but how do people get to it?
Hopefully, we're doing some of that now by you sharing.
I hope so.
Darrol, you said you measure the nutritional value of the food that you're growing. I'm curious as to what measurements you look at. I'm familiar with the bricks. Is that how you're doing it, or what else do you look at?
Yes, Glenn. I'm working with bricks, and I'm establishing a database of bricks from commercially grown food, traditionally grown food, organically, commercial organic, and garden grown. And by the end of summer, I'll have enough data that I can demonstrate that garden grown is always has a greater nutritional value. The one measurement I'd like to have is hydroponic, and I don't have a source for a good source for database for hydroponically grown food. That's a question that needs to be answered today, because in urban agriculture, hydroponic is becoming the go-to movement, and I'd like to see a nutritional comparison, frankly.
Yeah, and people are trying to eliminate the risk from growing, and so they want all that climate control. But some of the risk and some of the stress on the plant and some of the weather changes and this and that are what stimulate the production of a lot of the phytochemicals that contribute to the overall biochemical value of the produce.
You're reading my mind, Mary. What did we do in the 1950s to reduce some of the risk and increase production? We went to a limited nutritional content, NPK.
Yeah.
And what has that done but drive down the nutritional content of the food that we eat and drive up the cost of healthcare?
Yeah.
Are we doing that again with hydroponic?
Am I what?
Are we doing that again with a hydroponic solution by reducing the risks? Are we actually continuously going to reduce the nutritional content? We're separating ourselves from nature. It can't work, you know?
And as we're looking more at epigenetics and what happens with gene expression, I think that we need to start asking what this is doing long term to our development, not just in the current generation, but in what we pass on to future generations.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Because
I got more
anytime you
questions
change your
than I
food
can answer.
source, you're putting a selective pressure and basic evolution says we will adapt to that selective pressure, but what way will we adapt?
That's right.
In
So
what
what are
way?
these plants doing when they're grown under a limited light regime in the hydroponic, enclosed hydroponic systems where they're not even getting full sunlight? And you say, well,
Exactly.
the plants grow really well, but we're not looking at the microbiota.
And we're not looking at the total biochemistry.
No, we're not. So who's going to look at this?
Yeah.
Yeah,
These are complex questions. We're really at a point where people have to start taking a more local role and a more independent role in where the food is coming from.